They handcuffed my 78-year-old father. Two armed guards dragged him off the 2,300 acres with a private lake that I just inherited, just for walking to the fishing dock his grandfather built in 1923. Dad's lived here his whole life, taught half the neighborhood kids to fish on our private lake, never caused a single problem. Then Bethany Cromwell shows up, a lawyer from California, new HOA president after only 6 months. She declares our private lake now belongs to the community. She had a harmless old man arrested in front of everyone he's known for decades, all to seize property that existed 50 years before her HOA. I watched those cuffs snap on his shaking hands, heard the metal click echo across our quiet lake, and I knew they'd crossed the wrong family. Next morning, every single faucet in their neighborhood ran completely dry. What would you do if a power-hungry outsider tried stealing your inheritance? Where are you watching from? Drop your location and ultimate revenge idea below. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. My name's Jackson Ridge, I'm 45, and I just inherited the most beautiful piece of land in Virginia. 2,300 acres of rolling hills, pristine forest, and a crystal-clear 40-acre lake that's been in my family since Calvin Coolidge was president. My grandfather, Earl Ridge, bought this land in 1923 for $800 cash. The musty smell of old courthouse records still reminds me of researching those original deeds. Earl spent 3 years hand-digging channels, building stone retaining walls, and creating what became Lake Serenity, a perfect fishing hole that attracted families from 3 counties over. Dad, Harlan Ridge, worked this land for 50 years after Earl passed. Never charged a dime for folks to fish, swim, or bring their kids for picnics. The sound of children's laughter echoing across the water became the soundtrack of our summers. Dad always said, "Good neighbors make good communities." I spent 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers before coming home last year when Dad decided to retire. He officially transferred the property to me but kept living in the old homestead. The man's got more energy at 78 than most people half his age. In 2019, some California development company bought adjacent land and built Willowbrook Estates, 847 luxury homes marketed as exclusive lakefront living. The sales brochures literally featured photos of our lake, promising residents recreational access to pristine waterfront amenities. For 4 years, everything was fine. Then 6 months ago, new HOA elections brought in Bethany Cromwell as president. This woman's a real estate attorney who moved here from Orange County, drives a Tesla with custom LAYR1 plates, and apparently decided small-town Virginia needed some California-style property optimization. Bethany's first move? She showed up at our door with a stack of legal documents, her overpowering perfume mixing with the smell of fresh morning air. "Mr. Ridge," she said to Dad, all fake sweet voice, "I'm here to discuss our little access situation." Her solution? Pay the HOA $50,000 as a one-time community impact fee, plus $500 monthly maintenance contributions, or lose all lake access forever. She claimed some obscure county ordinance about public waterway rights gave her legal standing. Dad politely explained that our property predated their development by almost a century, and maybe we could work something out that didn't involve extortion. Bethany's mask slipped. "Sir, I don't think you understand modern property law. Times have changed. Perhaps it's time for you to change with them." The crunch of gravel under her designer heels as she walked back to her Tesla sounded like a threat. 2 days later, she escalated. County inspector showed up citing anonymous complaints about potential environmental hazards. Found nothing, of course, but the harassment had begun. Dad started having chest pains that week. "Stress," the doctor said. This woman was literally making my father sick with her legal terrorism. The final straw came 3 weeks ago at the HOA meeting. Dad attended hoping reasonable discussion might resolve things. Instead, Bethany publicly humiliated him in front of 200 neighbors. "Mr. Ridge is hoarding community resources," she announced. "Elderly residents who can't adapt to changing community standards might be happier in assisted living facilities. We need to think about what's best for families with children." The room went silent. She'd just told a 78-year-old pillar of the community to go die in a nursing home, in front of people who'd known Dad their entire lives. The taste of bile rose in my throat as I watched Dad's face crumble. But Bethany wasn't done. "The Ridge property poses ongoing liability risks. We're exploring all legal options to protect our community from environmental and safety hazards. That night, Dad couldn't sleep. I found him sitting on the dock at 3 a.m., staring at water his grandfather had created with his bare hands. "She's going to take it all, isn't she, son?" That's when I realized this wasn't about neighborly disputes anymore. Bethany Cromwell had declared war on my family, and she had no idea what she was messing with. Bethany didn't waste time turning her threats into action. The morning after that disastrous HOA meeting, she filed an emergency injunction with the county court claiming Lake Serenity was a community asset being illegally withheld from public use. This woman actually argued that because Willowbrook residents had been using our lake for 4 years, they'd established adverse possession rights. I remembered my Army Corps training about property law. If you let neighbors use your land without documented permission, you can lose ownership rights entirely. Dad's handshake agreements with previous residents suddenly looked like legal quicksand. 3 days later, she escalated with a surveyor, some shifty-looking guy from 2 counties over who clearly owed her a favor. They spent 6 hours remeasuring our property lines, discovering that lake boundaries were historically incorrect and actually extended into community easement zones. I watched from the kitchen window as they hammered new stakes along our shoreline, the metallic ring echoing across water that had been ours for a century. The smell of diesel from their equipment mixed with morning lake mist, creating this toxic cloud that perfectly symbolized what Bethany was doing to our peaceful home. The fake survey was amateur hour, deliberately omitting the natural spring system feeding the lake. Any real engineer would have spotted the underground channels immediately, but accuracy wasn't Bethany's goal. She wanted ammunition for her land grab. Then she went nuclear with a press conference right on our lakefront, inviting reporters from 3 counties to witness her exposing environmental violations by an elderly hoarder. This woman set up folding chairs on our private beach while claiming we were denying water access to children and families. The audacity was breathtaking, like a burglar holding a press conference in your living room. Here's where things got interesting. While researching our property defense at the county courthouse, I overheard Bethany in the parking lot on her phone. She thought she was being discreet behind her Tesla, but stone buildings carry voices like megaphones. "The environmental angle isn't working fast enough," she hissed. "I need that lake drained and prepped for construction by spring. Yes, I already took the consultation fee. We're committed now." My blood went cold. This wasn't about community access or environmental concerns. Bethany had already taken developer money to convert our century-old natural ecosystem into a golf course. She was planning to murder Lake Serenity for 18 holes of Kentucky bluegrass. "The old man's practically dead anyway," she continued. "Stress-induced heart problems. We just need to accelerate the timeline. Maybe additional regulatory pressure?" The taste of rage was metallic on my tongue. She was actively trying to kill my father with bureaucratic harassment. This wasn't legal maneuvering anymore. This was attempted murder by paperwork. But while Bethany played legal games with fake surveys, I was studying real infrastructure. 20 years in the Army Corps had taught me that water systems are like chess games. Control the source, control everything downstream. Our lake isn't just rainwater in a hole. It's fed by underground aquifers crossing 6 properties, including every lot in Willowbrook Estates. Grandfather Earl's engineering was elegant. Gravity-fed spring water flowing through hand-built stone channels, maintaining perfect pressure and temperature year-round. More importantly, every well in Willowbrook sits downstream from our source. Cut the spring flow, and 847 homes lose water supply within hours. Bethany was threatening to steal the very system keeping her community alive. That evening, I walked the property with Dad, following old stone channels by flashlight. The crunch of autumn leaves under our boots reminded me of childhood explorations with Grandfather Earl, learning the secrets of his water kingdom. "Your grandfather was a genius," I told Dad as we traced the underground network. "He didn't just build a lake, he created the water infrastructure for this entire valley." Dad smiled for the first time in weeks. "Earl always said water flows to those who understand it, son. Maybe it's time Bethany learned that lesson." The next morning brought Bethany's biggest mistake, a document declaring our homestead a public nuisance, triggering emergency land use hearings. She'd bribed the county assessor to force municipal seizure of our property through eminent domain. "Due to ongoing environmental hazards and community safety concerns," the notice read, The Ridge property requires immediate oversight pending resolution of public access disputes. But reading that bogus assessment, something clicked. Bethany was making the classic bully mistake, overplaying her hand. Every illegal move created evidence for our eventual counterattack. She was building our lawsuit for us, one corrupt document at a time. I poured Dad another cup of coffee, the rich aroma mixing with cool morning air off our lake. You know what, old man? I think it's time we reminded Ms. Cromwell where her water actually comes from. The sound of morning birds singing over Lake Serenity had never sounded sweeter. War had been declared, but Bethany had no idea she was fighting an engineer who controlled her lifeline. Sometimes the best revenge is simply turning off the tap. Bethany's next move proved she'd learned absolutely nothing about picking fights with people who actually know how to fight back. Instead of backing down after her bogus survey got laughed out of court, she decided to go full social warfare with a campaign that would have made a political operative proud. First came the Save Our Community petition drive. Bethany stationed herself outside the local grocery store with a folding table, clipboard, and her most sympathetic smile, telling anyone who'd listen that the Ridge family was hoarding vital community resources from hardworking families with children. The woman had brass, I'll give her that, standing there in her $300 designer jacket, which probably cost more than most folks' monthly grocery budget, spinning tales about how we were environmental criminals. The smell of her vanilla perfume mixed with parking lot exhaust fumes, creating this cloying sweetness that perfectly matched her fake community concern. But petitions weren't enough for our aspiring dictator. She launched a whisper campaign that would have impressed middle school mean girls. Suddenly neighbors were gossiping about our unpaid taxes. We were current on everything. Environmental damage, our lake was cleaner than city water, and my personal favorite, that I was a dangerous loner veteran with PTSD who might snap. That last one really burned. 20 years serving my country, and this carpetbagging lawyer was weaponizing veteran stereotypes to steal family land. The irony of using fear tactics against veterans while living in a community they'd helped protect wasn't lost on me. While Bethany played propaganda games, I was building intelligence networks. The maintenance guy for Willowbrook Estates, Cisco Valdez, had grown tired of his new boss. Over coffee at Murphy's Diner, where the vinyl booth seats creak like old ships and bacon grease perfumes every conversation, Cisco shared fascinating details about Bethany's real agenda. "She's got Mrs. Henley scared to death," he said, stirring sugar into coffee that could strip paint. "Threatened her with 15 grand in landscape compliance fees or daily fines. Woman's on Social Security, she can't afford either option." But here's where things got interesting. Cisco mentioned that several residents who'd questioned Bethany's tactics had received sudden special assessment notices for bogus violations. Peeling paint, mailbox height infractions, even non-compliant garden gnomes. You can't make this stuff up. She was weaponizing HOA bylaws like a medieval torture device. Then Cisco dropped the real bombshell. Her mortgage company's the same outfit pushing this golf course deal. Been asking weird questions about property values if the lake disappeared. My Army Corps training kicked in. I'd seen these schemes in environmental impact studies. Developers use HOA pressure to force acquisitions they couldn't achieve legally. Bethany wasn't just stealing our lake. She was running a protection racket with a law degree. The next week brought her masterpiece, an emergency city council meeting about our ongoing threat to community safety. I showed up with 3 fellow veterans who'd heard about her smear campaign. Nothing says dangerous loner like having your squad watch your 6. Watching Bethany's presentation was like witnessing a masterclass in manipulation. Charts, graphs, carefully edited photos, making our homestead look like Chernobyl. Her PowerPoint featured ominous red arrows pointing to our dock, pump house, even Dad's fishing chair, each labeled a potential community hazard. "The Ridge family's refusal to modernize poses ongoing risks," she announced with courtroom confidence. "We're simply asking for reasonable compliance with community welfare standards." But here's where Bethany's arrogance created her first real mistake. While she'd been busy playing politics, the County Water Authority had quietly launched their own investigation. Turns out someone had been filing detailed reports about her environmental fraud claims. Someone who understood federal regulations about false agency reports. Someone who'd spent decades documenting water system compliance. The council meeting ended with uncomfortable questions about Bethany's evidence sources and methodology. Her presentation was too polished, too rehearsed, like a sales pitch rather than genuine community concern. Walking to my truck afterward, several Willowbrook residents approached quietly. Martha Henley grabbed my sleeve with trembling fingers, her voice barely a whisper above the evening breeze rustling through oak trees. "Mr. Ridge, I don't think Mrs. Cromwell represents our best interests. Some of us never wanted this fight with your family. We just want our peaceful neighborhood back." That moment changed everything. Bethany had made a fatal assumption that her community shared her ruthless ambition. But these were decent people who'd been lied to and manipulated by a skilled predator who'd mistaken fear for loyalty. 3 more residents approached that night, each quietly expressing doubts about their HOA president's increasingly aggressive tactics. Young mother Sarah Kim mentioned her kids missed swimming in our lake. Retired teacher Bill Morrison remembered learning to fish there 40 years ago. The drive home felt different. War was far from over, but for the first time I wasn't fighting alone. Bethany had awakened something she couldn't control, a community's conscience. Bethany's response to losing community support was pure desperation wrapped in legal jargon. If she couldn't steal our lake through social pressure, she'd manufacture a federal case forcing government seizure of our property. 3 days after that disastrous city council meeting, she filed an EPA complaint claiming our family had violated the Clean Water Act through decades of environmental negligence. The woman actually argued that our century-old water management system posed an imminent threat to regional groundwater supplies. But paperwork wasn't enough for our wannabe environmental warrior. She orchestrated a full media spectacle with fake evidence that would have impressed Hollywood prop masters. I watched from our kitchen window as she directed her environmental consultant, some guy who looked more like he sold extended car warranties than analyzed water samples, to dump motor oil near our lake's edge. The smell of petroleum mixing with morning mist created this nauseating cocktail. Not because of the odor, but because I was watching someone deliberately poison the environment they claimed to protect. If irony could kill, Bethany would have been DOA. 20 minutes after the oil dumping, Channel 7 News arrived with suspiciously perfect timing. Bethany stood there in her power suit, pointing dramatically at the evidence while cameras rolled. "This is exactly the environmental negligence threatening our community," she announced with Oscar-worthy fake concern. That evening's headline made my blood boil. "Local family's environmental negligence threatens community water supply." They showed footage of the oil slick, Bethany's crocodile tears about children's safety, and zero investigation into where that oil actually originated. But here's the advantage of fighting someone when you've spent 20 years in the Army Corps. We document everything. While Bethany performed for cameras, I was photographing her environmental consultant from my bedroom window with military-grade optics, license plates, timestamps, even the quick lube receipt sticking out of his pocket like a confession letter. Within 48 hours, I'd called Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a water quality expert who'd testified before Congress. While news crews filmed, she took independent samples from our lake, her professional equipment making Bethany's consultant's dollar store test kit look like a children's chemistry set. Dr. Martinez's results made Bethany's fraud spectacularly obvious. Lake Serenity had the cleanest water in the county, cleaner than municipal supplies, with trace mineral content indicating natural spring sources. The oil? Fresh 10W30 that hadn't even weathered, clearly dumped hours before discovery. The smoking gun came from invoices Cisco had photographed in Bethany's Tesla. Her environmental consultant was actually her lawn service contractor, paid $500 cash to dump oil and play scientist for cameras. Environmental fraud carries 5-year federal prison sentences, apparently not covered in Bethany's law school curriculum. Local news retracted their story after Dr. Martinez went public about planted evidence. Watching Bethany's face during that follow-up interview was better than Christmas morning. The woman looked like she'd swallowed a live hornet, stammering about possible contamination from unknown sources, while cameras captured obvious lies. Meanwhile, the community was finally awakening to their elected monster. Martha Henley organized an informal meeting at the community center to discuss concerns about current HOA leadership. 57 residents showed up, massive turnout for Willowbrook. The stories revealed systematic harassment and financial abuse. Cisco exposed how Bethany had redirected $180,000 from community pool maintenance to pay private attorneys and fake environmental consultants. She'd been embezzling community resources to fund her personal vendetta against our family. Several military veterans rallied around what they called an attack on one of their own. These guys had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia. They recognized authoritarian tactics immediately. Having that brotherhood support felt like armor against Bethany's psychological warfare. But facing potential criminal charges for environmental fraud and community revolt, Bethany made the desperate move of someone with nothing left to lose. She filed a restraining order against Dad, claiming he'd made threatening gestures during a chance post office encounter. The accusation was laughable. Dad had simply nodded politely like he did with every neighbor. But it achieved her real goal, painting a 78-year-old man as a dangerous threat requiring legal protection. The court hearing was scheduled for Monday. If granted, the restraining order would legally ban Dad from half the county, including his own property's lakefront access. Bethany was attempting to exile him from land his grandfather had purchased with cash a century ago. That night, Dad and I sat on our dock watching sunset paint the lake in gold and crimson. Peaceful water sounds contrasted sharply with the legal chaos surrounding us. "She's scared now," Dad observed quietly, casting his evening fishing line. "Desperate people do desperate things. Your grandfather always said cornered rattlesnakes strike wildest." He was right. Every escalation revealed Bethany's growing panic as schemes collapsed around her. But cornered predators are the most dangerous kind, and I suspected her next move would be her most vicious yet. The question was, how far would this woman go to steal a lake that had never belonged to her? While organizing Dad's papers for the restraining order hearing, I discovered something that changed everything. Hidden in a shoebox beneath decades of fishing licenses was a manila envelope marked "Emergency Use Only" in Grandfather Earl's spidery handwriting. Inside was the original 1923 water rights agreement, not just our property deed, but a separate document I'd never known existed. The yellowed paper crackled like autumn leaves, releasing that musty courthouse smell that had become my life's unfortunate soundtrack. But this wasn't ordinary paperwork. It was a perpetual easement granting the Ridge family exclusive authority to regulate, redirect, or restrict all water sources within a 5-mile radius of the natural spring system. The legal language was ironclad, predating every modern zoning law and HOA covenant by decades. Grandfather Earl's handwritten note was clipped to the document. "In case someone tries to steal what we built, the master valve is behind the lightning split oak, 30 paces from the stone bridge. Emergency use only. This power comes with great responsibility. P.S. Don't tell your grandmother about this until absolutely necessary. She worries." Even in a crisis, the old man was protecting family peace. Some things never change. I called Dad immediately. "Did you know about this valve system?" His chuckle crackled through the phone. "Your grandfather was thorough, son. He figured someday somebody might try taking what we created. That agreement gives us legal control over every drop of water feeding this valley." The implications were staggering. Every well in Willowbrook Estates, every home in 3 surrounding developments, every business in the county, they all depended on groundwater flowing through aquifers originating on our property. We didn't just own Lake Serenity, we controlled the entire regional water supply. But here's where things got really interesting. A quick record search revealed Bethany had personally guaranteed the HOA's legal fees through her private law practice. If she lost, her personal assets faced massive liability claims. She wasn't fighting for community control, she was fighting to avoid personal bankruptcy. The country club developers had already paid her $200,000 in consultation fees for delivering lake property. She'd spent money she couldn't return, committed to a deal she couldn't escape. Every escalation wasn't just desperation. It was financial suicide prevention. That afternoon, I hiked to the lightning split oak, counting 30 paces from the old stone bridge. Behind the massive trunk, hidden by decades of undergrowth, was a hand-built stone chamber containing the original master valve system. The engineering was breathtaking. Earl had created a gravity-fed control system that could redirect the entire aquifer away from downstream properties with one iron wheel turn. A century-old mechanism that controlled thousands of people's fate, hidden in our backyard like some fairy tale magic. I tested the valve carefully, feeling decades of rust give way to smooth metal. It turned easily, and within minutes water levels changed in stone channels feeding toward Willowbrook. This wasn't just legal rights, we had physical control over their lifeline. But with that power came uncomfortable realization. Using this valve meant innocent families would suffer for their HOA president's crimes. Kids, elderly residents, people who'd never wanted this fight, they'd all pay for Bethany's greed. The responsibility felt like carrying a live grenade. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice, community, and the difference between fighting monsters and becoming one. Walking back, Dad met me at the kitchen door. "Found it, didn't you?" I nodded, still processing what we controlled. "Your grandfather used to say real power isn't what you can do. It's knowing when not to do it," Dad said quietly. "But sometimes evil needs consequences. That's what separates justice from revenge." He was right. Bethany had declared war, but we held the ultimate trump card. The question wasn't whether we'd play it, it was how to use it without destroying innocent lives in the process. That night I couldn't sleep. The weight of controlling an entire community's water supply kept me staring at ceiling cracks while the old house creaked around us like a ship in harbor. By dawn, I'd made my decision. If we were going to use this power, we'd do it right. No innocent casualties, maximum impact on the guilty, and ironclad legal protection. First Light found me installing trail cameras around the valve system, the morning dew soaking through my boots as I positioned each device for perfect coverage. 20 years of military planning had taught me that preparation beats improvisation every time. If Bethany somehow discovered our trump card, I wanted video evidence of any sabotage attempts. The coffee at Murphy's Diner tasted like burnt motor oil, but it was strong enough to keep me alert while civil rights attorney Marcus Webb spread our documents across the sticky Formica table. Marcus specialized in destroying corrupt HOA boards, and his eyes gleamed like a hunter spotting fresh tracks when I described our situation. "Water rights easements from the 1920s are basically constitutional law," he explained, tapping our yellow documents with nicotine-stained fingers. "Modern HOA covenants can't override them. Plus, if she's embezzling community funds and filing false government reports, we're looking at federal racketeering charges." Most people don't realize that HOA board members lose personal liability protection the moment they commit fraud. Corporate shields dissolve faster than sugar in sweet tea when you abuse your position for personal gain. While Marcus prepared legal artillery, I focused on community intelligence gathering. Cisco had become our inside man, documenting every illegal fee and threat Bethany made to residents. His maintenance rounds provided perfect cover for photographing bogus violation notices and recording intimidation tactics. The man had turned his tool belt into a spy kit that would have impressed James Bond. Martha Henley organized coffee mornings where neighbors could share HOA horror stories without fear of retaliation. The stories that emerged made my blood pressure spike higher than Dad's when the doctor mentioned exercise restrictions. Bethany had threatened foreclosure on 3 elderly residents who questioned her authority. She'd impose thousands in bogus fines for violations like non-compliance mailbox height and excessive bird feeding. One family faced daily penalties because their 7-year-old's chalk drawings were deemed inappropriate sidewalk decorations. The woman was literally fining families for children being children. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the environmental scientist who'd exposed Bethany's oil dumping fraud, agreed to conduct a comprehensive water quality study. Her report would prove that Ridge family stewardship had created an environmental treasure, not the hazard Bethany claimed. The smell of chemical testing solutions and the hum of electronic equipment filled our lakeside air as Rebecca documented decades of successful conservation. Technical preparation was straightforward but crucial. I tested the master valve system repeatedly, the ancient iron wheel grinding like old bones but turning smoothly once warmed up. Earl's engineering was brilliant. Separate channels fed emergency services through independent aquifer taps that bypassed our control system. The man had built humanitarian protections into his water kingdom. Planning the public demonstration required surgical precision. I wanted maximum visual impact, Bethany's sprinklers dying on camera while she spoke, but immediate restoration to prove we weren't vindictive, education, not punishment of innocent residents. I rented the community center for an open discussion about lake access and community cooperation. The irony tasted sweeter than Dad's homemade apple pie, using HOA facilities to destroy their president's illegal schemes. Every Willowbrook resident would be invited, along with county officials, environmental groups, and local media. Marcus suggested timing our water demonstration for the exact moment Bethany would present her final solution for the Ridge family problem. Intelligence from Cisco indicated she was planning to announce forced municipal seizure of our property through eminent domain proceedings. Perfect. Let her declare victory right before demonstrating who actually controlled the water. Dad insisted on attending despite health concerns, adjusting the oxygen tank his doctor had prescribed for stress-related breathing issues. I want to see her face when the lights go out, son. Been waiting 78 years to watch someone learn respect for water rights. The sound of determination in his voice reminded me why this fight mattered beyond property rights. This was about dignity, legacy, and proving that bullies eventually face consequences. Our preparation included backup plans for every contingency. If Bethany tried arrests, Marcus would be present with injunctions. If she claimed sabotage, we'd have video proof of legitimate valve operation. If she accused us of endangering public safety, Dr. Martinez would testify about our environmental protections. Coordinating with county water authorities was surprisingly pleasant. They were fascinated by our century-old system and eager to document traditional engineering techniques for historical archives. Government employees who actually cared about their work, imagine that. Everything aligned like stars during a perfect night patrol. Bethany had spent months escalating attacks, unknowingly building the perfect stage for her own public destruction. Friday evening couldn't come fast enough. After months of harassment, legal terrorism, and personal attacks on my father, justice was finally ready to flow downhill like water finding its natural course. With our Friday confrontation just days away, Bethany made her most desperate move yet. If she couldn't win through legal channels or community pressure, she'd resort to tactics that would have impressed a third-world dictator. Monday morning brought private security to our property, 3 guards in black uniforms claiming they were protecting community assets from potential sabotage. These weren't mall cops. They looked like ex-military contractors with tactical gear and attitudes that screamed, "We get paid to intimidate people." The crunch of their boots on our gravel driveway at 6 a.m. sent a clear message. We were now under siege. But Bethany's intimidation campaign was just warming up. That afternoon, she distributed flyers around Willowbrook featuring my military photo alongside warnings about PTSD-induced violence and unstable veteran behavior. The woman was literally using my service record as a weapon against my family. The smell of cheap printer ink mixed with my rising fury as neighbors started crossing streets to avoid eye contact. 20 years defending democracy overseas, and some California transplant was painting me as a domestic terrorist because I wouldn't hand over my inheritance. The irony was thicker than molasses in January. Her psychological warfare intensified with anonymous calls to adult protective services, claiming Dad was being elder abused by his mentally unstable son. Social workers showed up demanding to inspect our home, forcing my 78-year-old father to prove he wasn't being mistreated on his own property. Watching Dad answer questions about his mental competency while strangers photographed his medication schedule was heartbreaking. The humiliation in his eyes as they asked about signs of intimidation nearly broke me. Bethany was weaponizing agencies designed to protect vulnerable people against the very families they should be helping. Meanwhile, those security guards weren't just intimidating, they were conducting full surveillance operations. Classic techniques I recognized from overseas, documenting routines, photographing property, recording visitors. This woman was treating American citizens like enemy combatants on their own land. But paranoia started working against her. Cisco discovered she'd been secretly negotiating to sell HOA common areas, including the community pool, playground, and walking trails, to her golf course developers. She was planning to eliminate recreational facilities that families had paid premium prices to access, then pocket the proceeds. The community finally awakened to their elected monster. Sarah Kim organized a petition demanding Bethany's immediate removal from the HOA board. Within 48 hours, they'd collected over 300 signatures, more than enough to trigger a recall election under Virginia law. Bethany's response was swift and vicious. Lawsuits against petition organizers claiming defamation and conspiracy to damage property values. The taste of legal harassment was becoming as familiar as morning coffee as she weaponized courts against anyone opposing her reign. Her biggest mistake was underestimating military brotherhood. Word about veteran-targeting flyers had spread through informal networks connecting everyone from Vietnam-era Marines to recent Afghanistan veterans. These guys recognized tyranny when they saw it, whether in foreign dictatorships or suburban HOA boards. Wednesday evening brought Colonel James Morrison, my old commanding officer, rumbling up our driveway in his diesel truck. The sound was like hearing cavalry horns during a desperate siege. "Heard you were having trouble with a local warlord," he said with that firm handshake of someone who'd led men through combat. "Thought you might appreciate backup for your community meeting." By Thursday, 15 veterans had confirmed attendance, not for intimidation, but to demonstrate that attacking one veteran meant facing the entire brotherhood. The psychological impact was already visible. Bethany's security guards looked nervous, spotting military license plates gathering around town. Thursday evening brought her final desperate gambit, an emergency restraining order against both Dad and me, claiming we'd made credible threats of domestic terrorism involving critical infrastructure. The woman was arguing that our own water system constituted a weapon of mass destruction. The legal papers arrived with nervous process server who clearly didn't want to be on our property. Due to credible threats involving water supply manipulation, the order read, respondents are prohibited from accessing or operating any water control mechanisms pending environmental safety assessment. Reading those words, I realized Bethany had discovered our master valve system. Whether through surveillance, insider information, or pure legal paranoia, she knew we controlled Willowbrook's water supply and was trying to neutralize our advantage before Friday's meeting. But she'd made one crucial mistake. Restraining orders don't take effect until properly served and processed. We still had 18 hours before any restrictions kicked in, plenty of time to demonstrate exactly who controlled the water flowing through her precious pipes. Dad chuckled when I explained the timing loophole. "Your grandfather always said the best lawyers are the ones who get too clever for their own good." Bethany just outmaneuvered herself. He was right. In her desperation to prevent our water demonstration, she'd essentially announced that we had the power to shut off her community's supply. Tomorrow's meeting had just transformed from neighborhood dispute into public education about the realities of water rights. The irony was delicious. Bethany had spent months claiming we posed a threat to community water, and now she'd legally confirmed that we actually controlled it. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes you believe justice might actually exist in this world. But Bethany wasn't going down without a fight that would have impressed a cornered Wolverine. Her first move was attempting to have me arrested on fabricated assault charges. At 7 a.m., 2 sheriff's deputies knocked on our door with a warrant based on Bethany's sworn statement that I'd threatened her with military-grade weapons during a gas station encounter that never happened. The woman had literally invented a crime scene, complete with fabricated witness statements from her security guards. Fortunately, gas station security cameras told a different story. I'd been filling up my truck while Bethany sat in her Tesla 30 feet away, never approaching within speaking distance. The deputies left with apologies and what looked like serious doubts about their complainant's credibility. Nothing quite like video evidence to expose a pathological liar. But false arrest was just her opening salvo. By noon, she'd escalated to what could only be described as community-wide extortion. Every Willowbrook resident received certified letters announcing emergency special assessments of $5,000 per household, due immediately or face foreclosure proceedings. The timing wasn't coincidental. She was trying to turn the entire community against us by creating a financial crisis. The smell of fear and anger was palpable as residents gathered in small groups throughout the neighborhood, clutching those threatening letters like death sentences. Martha Henley called me in tears, explaining that her fixed Social Security income couldn't possibly cover such an assessment. 3 other elderly residents faced similar impossible choices between bankruptcy and homelessness. Meanwhile, Cisco had discovered Bethany's most damning secret yet. Bank records showing she'd embezzled nearly $200,000 from HOA accounts over the past 6 months. She'd been systematically looting community funds to pay for her legal war against our family, using resident fees to finance her personal vendetta. When Marcus Webb saw the evidence, his eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. "This isn't just embezzlement anymore," he explained over lunch at Murphy's Diner, the familiar creak of vinyl booth seats providing background to our conspiracy. "She's been operating a criminal enterprise under color of HOA authority. Federal racketeering charges carry 20-year sentences. But Bethany wasn't just stealing money, she was destroying lives with surgical precision. That afternoon brought reports that she'd contacted Child Protective Services about 3 families who'd signed the recall petition, claiming their children were being exposed to environmental hazards from our lake system. Parents were frantically arranging childcare during emergency home inspections, terrified that questioning their HOA president might cost them custody of their kids. The psychological terrorism was working. Several petition signers called to withdraw their support, too scared of Bethany's retaliation to continue fighting. The woman had successfully weaponized every government agency designed to protect citizens, turning them into instruments of oppression against her own community. By late afternoon, the stakes had escalated beyond property disputes into something resembling asymmetric warfare. Bethany had hired additional security guards, 6 total now, to patrol Willowbrook with instructions to photograph and document anyone attending our evening meeting. She was creating a climate of surveillance and intimidation that would have impressed the East German Stasi. But her most desperate move came at 4 p.m. An emergency court filing claiming our planned community meeting constituted credible terrorist threats against critical infrastructure. She was literally arguing that discussing water rights in a public forum was an act of domestic terrorism requiring immediate federal intervention. The FBI actually sent agents to investigate her terrorism claims. Special Agent Rebecca Torres arrived at our door looking like she'd rather be investigating actual crimes instead of HOA drama. After reviewing Bethany's evidence, essentially screenshots of our community meeting announcement, Agent Torres couldn't hide her exasperation. "Ma'am," she told Bethany during a conference call that Cisco somehow recorded, "organizing a community meeting to discuss property rights isn't terrorism. Filing false federal reports, however, is a felony that could land you in prison for 5 years." The taste of vindication was sweeter than Dad's homemade apple pie as we watched Bethany's last-ditch legal gambit collapse under federal scrutiny. But cornered predators are most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. That evening, just 2 hours before our community meeting, Bethany made her final play. She attempted to physically drain Lake Serenity by hiring contractors to dig emergency spillways that would redirect water away from our property. I discovered the sabotage attempt during my final security check, finding 3 men with excavation equipment preparing to destroy a century-old ecosystem to spite one family's refusal to surrender their inheritance. The sound of diesel engines and the smell of disturbed earth filled the evening air as they prepared to commit environmental vandalism that would have taken decades to repair. That's when I realized Bethany had crossed the final line from legal harassment into actual criminal destruction. She was willing to murder Lake Serenity rather than admit defeat in her war against our family. Standing there watching contractors prepare to destroy my grandfather's life work, I made a decision that would define everything that followed. It was time to end this war once and for all. The Willowbrook Community Center had never seen anything like it. By 7 p.m., over 250 people packed into a space designed for 150, with overflow crowds gathering outside under portable floodlights that cast dramatic shadows across the parking lot. Local news crews from 3 counties had positioned cameras for maximum coverage, while county officials occupied the front row like judges at a tribunal. Bethany arrived fashionably late in a rented limousine. Apparently regular luxury wasn't sufficient for her victory lap. She emerged wearing a new designer suit that probably cost more than most residents' monthly mortgage payments, carrying a briefcase that gleamed under camera lights like a weapon of legal destruction. Her presentation setup was impressive. Professional sound system, giant projection screen displaying Lake Serenity development plans, and enough legal documents to choke a courthouse. The woman had clearly spent thousands on this dog and pony show, money that undoubtedly came from embezzled HOA funds. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bethany began with courtroom confidence, "tonight marks the end of a selfish family's stranglehold on community resources that rightfully belong to all residents." The projection screen lit up with architectural renderings showing our lake transformed into an 18-hole golf course, complete with clubhouse, pro shop, and luxury condominiums. The audacity was breathtaking. She was literally advertising the destruction of our family's century-old legacy while claiming community benefit. "The Ridge family has hoarded these water resources for decades," she continued, gesturing dramatically toward Dad and me sitting in the back row. "But modern property law recognizes that individual greed cannot override collective community needs." That's when I stood up, asking permission to respond to these allegations. The room fell silent except for the hum of camera equipment and the nervous shifting of folding chairs. Dad gripped his oxygen tank tighter, his eyes sparkling with anticipation for what was about to unfold. Ms. Cromwell, I said, walking toward the front with deliberate military bearing, before you continue claiming ownership of our property, perhaps the community should understand who actually controls their water supply. I produced the original 1923 easement documents, handing them to County Attorney Michael Peterson for authentication. The rustle of ancient paper seemed amplified in the suddenly quiet room as he examined Grandfather Earl's ironclad water rights agreement. These documents appear authentic and binding, Peterson announced to the crowd. The Ridge family holds permanent, irrevocable control over all water sources within a 5-mile radius of their natural spring system. Gasps echoed through the community center as residents realized the implications. Every faucet, every toilet, every sprinkler system in Willowbrook depended entirely on water flowing through our property. Bethany's face went pale as she understood her legal position had just evaporated like morning mist. But let me demonstrate exactly what this means, I continued, pulling out my phone to call Cisco, who was positioned at the master valve system. Ms. Cromwell has spent months claiming we pose a threat to community water. Perhaps it's time to show everyone who really controls that threat. The sound of the ancient valve wheel turning carried across the phone speaker, amplified through the community center's sound system. Within minutes, residents throughout the room started receiving text messages and phone calls from neighbors reporting complete loss of water pressure. Through the community center's large windows, we could see Bethany's sprinkler system, visible across the parking lot, beginning to sputter and die. Jets of water became weak streams, then nothing but air and dust clouds across her manicured lawn. The visual impact was devastating, like watching her authority literally dry up in real time. "This is what happens," I announced to the stunned crowd, "when someone tries to steal water rights from people who actually control the source." But I immediately called Cisco back, restoring full water pressure within 30 seconds. And this is what happens when water rights are respected and used responsibly. The psychological impact was complete. Every person in that room understood that Bethany had been trying to steal something she could never actually control, while the Ridge family had been protecting a resource they'd managed sustainably for a century. That's when Dad struggled to his feet, oxygen tank wheeling beside him, to deliver what would become the most quoted line of the entire saga. "Ms. Cromwell," he said in a voice that carried 7 decades of authority, "you just learned something my grandfather taught me. You can't steal water from people who control the well." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers that seemed to shake the building's foundation. Camera flashes lit up the room like lightning as reporters captured the moment a 78-year-old man delivered the knockout blow to a corrupt HOA tyrant. But the evening's drama wasn't finished. FBI agents entered the community center with arrest warrants for Bethany, charges including fraud, embezzlement, filing false federal reports, and civil rights violations. The woman who'd terrorized an entire community for months was led away in handcuffs while cameras rolled and residents cheered like they'd just been liberated from occupation. 6 months later, Bethany Cromwell was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison plus $500,000 in restitution to the Willowbrook community. The judge's comments during sentencing perfectly captured what she'd become. A predator who used legal knowledge to terrorize innocent families while enriching herself through systematic theft and abuse of power. The HOA financial recovery was swift and decisive. Residents received full refunds of illegal fees totaling $180,000, money that had been hidden in Bethany's personal accounts and investment funds. The community pool was renovated with embezzled funds, the playground received new equipment, and walking trails were expanded using settlement money from Bethany's seized assets. More importantly, Willowbrook implemented new oversight rules preventing future abuse. The reformed HOA board includes diverse representation from all neighborhoods, with mandatory financial transparency and resident approval required for any legal expenditures over $1,000. No single person would ever again wield the dictatorial power that Bethany had abused so ruthlessly. Dad's health improved dramatically once the stress disappeared. His chest pains vanished, the oxygen tank went back to the medical supply company, and he returned to his daily walks around Lake Serenity with renewed energy. The man who'd been targeted for destruction was now thriving at 78, teaching neighborhood children traditional fishing techniques their parents had never learned. Our lake access agreement became a model for community cooperation. Families enjoy swimming, fishing, and recreational activities under a formal arrangement that respects property rights while ensuring public benefit. Children's laughter once again echoes across water that their grandparents might have enjoyed decades earlier. But our most meaningful legacy started with the Ridge Family Foundation, established using settlement funds and designed to prevent future HOA abuse. The foundation awards annual college scholarships to students studying environmental science, legal advocacy, or community planning, skills needed to protect families from predators like Bethany. Our first scholarship recipient was Sarah Kim's daughter Emma, inspired by the water rights case to pursue environmental law. Emma wants to spend her career protecting natural resources from corporate exploitation and ensuring that communities have clean, accessible water for future generations. The $50,000 scholarship will fund her complete undergraduate education at Virginia Tech. Lake Serenity itself received official recognition as a county environmental protection zone, partnering with state university researchers studying sustainable water management. The traditional engineering techniques grandfather Earl pioneered are being documented for modern applications, proving that sometimes old wisdom surpasses new technology. Tourism has brought unexpected economic benefits to our entire region. The Water Rights Victory Tour attracts visitors interested in both environmental conservation and David versus Goliath stories of justice prevailing over corruption. Local businesses report increased revenue from families who want to fish in the lake that defeated corporate greed. The annual Lake Day Festival celebrates community cooperation over conflict. This year's festival featured barbecue, live music, children's fishing contests, and speeches from county officials who'd witnessed Bethany's downfall. Even some of her former supporters attended, grateful that her reign of terror had ended before destroying more families. Dad serves as honorary water rights consultant for the county, advising other communities facing similar HOA abuse or water management challenges. His expertise helps families understand their legal protections and resources available for fighting corruption. The man who was once targeted for elimination now helps others avoid the same persecution. I've decided to run for county commissioner on a platform of property rights protection and government accountability. Too many families face harassment from corrupt HOA boards, zoning officials, and other petty tyrants who abuse public trust for personal gain. Someone needs to stand up for ordinary citizens against institutional bullies. Our story continues inspiring similar lawsuits across Virginia and neighboring states. The Cromwell case established legal precedents strengthening homeowner protections against HOA overreach, while demonstrating that federal agencies will prosecute officials who weaponize their authority against innocent families. Every sunset over Lake Serenity reminds us that some battles are worth fighting, especially when they protect something bigger than personal property. We fought for dignity, legacy, and the principle that bullies eventually face consequences when they target the wrong family.
I keep thinking about the moment when Jackson stood up in that packed community center. Bethany's got her PowerPoint going, talking about seizing his family's lake, and Jackson just calmly pulls out a 1923 water rights document. Bethany never saw it coming. 6 months of legal threats, security guards, fake environmental reports, all built on the assumption that this guy didn't know what he actually owned. That's how these HOA situations play out. They count on you getting emotional. They count on you not knowing the rules and might do something stupid. Bethany probably figured she could wear him down and make him cave in. But while Bethany's busy playing game with fake reports, Jackson's sitting there with a document that predates her HOA by 50 years. Makes me wonder how many other families are dealing with this kind of situation. Person got some little authority and decides they know better than people who have been there for decades. Have you ever had to deal with such HOA board members who think the rules don't apply to them? Drop in the comments. And if you think this video was worth your time, smash that subscribe button. Sometimes the best defense is just actually knowing what you own.